Hello, everybody. It's me again, Chadre. Today we're going to be talking about a new topic, and this topic is called the Münchhausen Trilemma. So, what is it? Basically, it's just this sort of thought experiment that was conducted by this German philosopher named Hans Albert, and it basically just says that whenever you require a proof to prove a certain truth, you would face three challenges. You would have to face three challenges. And what are those challenges? Okay. So let's try to make an example in order to understand what the Munchausen trilemma is. So let's say you're debating with somebody about, let's say, a topic, abortion. Let's say the topic is about abortion and whether or not abortion is right or wrong. But the person you're debating with is on the pro side. Okay? So they're with abortion or they're for abortion. And they say that they might be arguing for abortion and they say a statement like this: abortion gives the woman their autonomy back. So they're basically arguing that abortion gives the affected woman their freedom, okay? Their freedom back because of what is the detrimental effects that they may be experiencing from being pregnant, okay? And you try to go against that by saying, what's the proof of this? How do you know that abortion gives the woman their autonomy? And that they gave you a reason. Okay? They give you a reason. And ultimately, you're going to ask for the proof of that other reason, of this second reason. Then you're going to ask the proof for the validity of that other reason and this other reason and it just keeps going back and forth. Okay? And this is the first sort of horn of the Munchausen trilemma. There were three.
Mm. Mm. No, 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 no. They on both nose. Yeah. Yeah.
There were three horns. The first is infinite regress. The second would be dogmatism, and the third would be circular reasoning. And the example that I gave you earlier best describes the first, which is infinite regress. When you ask for somebody what their reason is, or what their proof, or whatever sort of evidence they have in order to validate their statement, you would then feel compelled to ask for the reason behind that reason. Okay, so you're basically going why or how, or you're basically asking questions infinitely. Okay, and this turns into sort of like a loop wherein you're not really advancing the conversation. You're just asking for the reason why their reason is valid, and then you go back and forth, and then they give the reason, then you ask for another reason for the reason, and that's basically what infinite regress is. There is no stopping point. Okay? Unlike the second horn of Münchhausen trilemma, which is dogmatism. So, what is dogmatism? When you think about the word dogma, it basically just says something that is established, okay, that is established and has gained its common place in society. So, dogmatism, when it comes to the context of the Münchhausen trilemma, it basically just says that, okay, when you ask for a proof for a certain truth, okay, when you ask for a proof for a certain truth or a certain statement, ultimately you're going to get to these three horns. The second one is dogmatism. So I could say that hypothetically, if I were a police officer, if I were a police officer, let's say this is me. This is a person that I pulled over from the road because they weren't following road signages, or for example, they weren't following the speed limit for a certain highway, and then I caught them. And then they tell me, I asked them, "Do you know how fast you were going?" And then they say, you don't have to know how fast I was going. You could just trust me because I've been driving for 15 years," or something like, "Trust me because I'm a safe driver, or I'm a good driver. I'm a professional driver." That is what we call a dogma. Okay? So you rely on sort of like a stopping point for the argument because you somebody or you may have used something that is self-serving, that is use a certain statement that is self-serving, that is uh sort of like made to be self-serving, like for example the one that I said, like, "Just trust me, I'm a safe driver." So you weren't actually giving proof. Okay, you weren't actually answering the question that I asked you, that you were basically just relying on this sort of like vague statement, like uh it is also applicable in sort of like theology debates. For example, okay, we can ask the atheists. Like let's say we're having a theology debate with atheists. Okay, and I'm a Christian. Let's say I'm a Christian, and then I ask that atheist. Okay, I ask that atheist, "Why do you think God doesn't exist?" And then they say, "Because the science says so," but they're not actually giving any of the science at all. So that is what the dogma is. You're relying on something that is self-serving without actually explaining it. Okay? So the third horn of the Munchausen trilemma is circular reasoning. You may have already heard this from my video about logical fallacies. Circular reasoning. What is circular reasoning? To best understand what circular reasoning is, let's give you an example. Let's say you have a roommate. Let's say you have a roommate, and you've been with this roommate for a couple years now. Then they basically just tell you that they're moving out. You could say that, or you could ask them, why are they moving out? What are the reasons for them moving out? And hypothetically, if they were to answer you and say that they're moving out because they're moving out, that is what we call a circular reasoning. Because you haven't answered the question. You are using the premise as your conclusion. So if you guys watched my other video on symbolic logic, okay, when you're using your reason as sort of a source to justify your reason, that is what we call circular reason. Because you're just going back and forth. You're just going back to what you said earlier. Like, for example, if you haven't showered yet, which I hope you have, and then I asked you to go shower, you see? And then you ask me why. Why do I need to shower? And then I say, because you have to shower. That is a circular reasoning. Okay? But hopefully you do shower. Okay? So that's just a hypothetical sort of like scenario to really understand what circular reasoning is. Okay? I'll give you another example. A real life example with uh, debates. Let's go back to the example that I made earlier. Let's say that you're pro abortions. You sort of agree with the idea of abortion. And then I ask you, why do you think abortion gives women autonomy over their body or whatever sort of situation that they may be trying to escape or responsibility as well? Why do you think that? Why do you think abortion gives them that option? And then you answer me with, because it just does. That is what we call a circular reasoning. Okay? So to summarize, we have three sort of properties of the Münchhausen Trilemma. The infinite regress, wherein you have to find proof to validate the other proof that you have or the other reason that you have for something or a statement that you had in an argument, which basically just leads to nowhere. Especially just leads to just going back and forth. Okay. And we can also get the example of never mind. But either way, the second one would be dogmatism, which basically just says that you're trying to reason or you're trying to reason your statement or claim by saying that that's just the way it is, or just trying to stop the argument overall by saying that that's just how it goes, or that's just the way it is. But that is what we call dogmatism. And the third is circular reasoning, wherein you use the premise, the starting point of your statement, in order to justify itself or make it the conclusion for your statement. And that's basically the gist of the Münchhausen Trilemma.